My name is Molly, and I am 29 years old. For most of my life, the scent of baking wasn't just a smell. It was a language. It was the buttery, caramelized sugar dialect of my grandmother, a woman who could translate love into flour, eggs, and vanilla. After she was gone, I used her recipes, her dictionary of affection, to build a life. My sister Clara and I opened a bakery. It was my heart and her ambition, a partnership that felt for a time like its own perfect recipe. But then we won. We won a national award, the kind of accolade that turns a neighborhood gem into a destination. And that's when my family decided that the heart of the business was actually its greatest liability. They decided I was too unstable, too emotional, too much me to be trusted with success. They sat me down in my own bakery, a place built for my soul, and ambushed me with a lawyer. They slid a piece of paper across the table and told me to sign away my dream, claiming it was for the good of the family. They saw me as a problem to be managed, a loose cannon on the deck of their shiny new battleship. What they didn't know, what they never bothered to learn, was that the ship was never truly theirs to command. They had forgotten all about my grandmother's oldest friend, Eleonora, the woman who had provided the seed that started it all. And in that cold, sterile meeting, just as my world was about to shatter, the little bell above the bakery door chimed. And the woman who walked in wasn't just an old friend. She was a silent partner, and she had brought the receipts. Before I tell you exactly how a single, forgotten clause on a yellowed piece of paper turned my family's smug triumph into their most public humiliation, I'd love to know where in the world you're watching from. Let me know in the comments below. And if you've ever felt underestimated by the very people who were supposed to be your biggest supporters, go ahead and hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe, because this is a community for people who understand that sometimes the family you choose is the one that truly saves you. Pareva. It all started in a kitchen that smelled perpetually of cinnamon and melting butter. My grandmother, Evelyn, was a cartographer of flavors, and her domain was a sun-drenched room with a gently worn linoleum floor. For her, recipes weren't instructions. They were stories. The lemon cloud cake was the story of the summer she met my grandfather. The molasses crinkle cookies were the tale of a harsh winter overcome. I was her devoted apprentice, a small girl with a dusting of flour permanently on my nose, while my older sister Clara was praised for her perfect report cards and her sharp, analytical mind. I was praised for the silken texture of my pastry cream. My parents, Richard and Susan, saw Clara's achievements as investments in the future. They saw my passion as a charming, if slightly messy, hobby. "Oh, look what our little baker has made," my father would say, patting my head before turning back to Clara to discuss her latest debate club victory. The praise was sweet but thin, like a sugar glaze that cracks under the slightest pressure. Power. Clara was the golden child, not through any fault of her own, but by an unspoken family decree. She was brilliant, ambitious, and she fit the mold of success that my parents understood. She was polished, articulate, and pragmatic. I was not. I was emotional, intuitive, and I found my worth not in trophies or grades, but in the quiet, satisfied sigh of someone taking the first bite of a perfectly baked scone. This difference became a chasm as we grew older. A defining moment came on Clara's 16th birthday. I'd spent 2 full days working on a spectacular cake, a 3-tiered confection with hand-piped buttercream roses, a recipe from my grandmother's book that was reserved for the most special of occasions. I was so proud, my heart thumping as I carried it into the living room where her friends were gathered. The room went quiet, but it wasn't the hush of admiration I'd hoped for. It was the awkward silence of teenagers unsure how to react. Later, I overheard Clara talking to a friend in the hallway. "It's a bit much, isn't it?" she'd whispered, a nervous laugh in her voice. I was kind of hoping for that sleek modern cake from that new downtown patisserie. This is so homemade. The word homemade was delivered with the same tone one might use for infested. my masterpiece, my offering of love, was a source of social embarrassment. When my mother found me crying in the kitchen later, she didn't comfort me, she sighed. A sound of pure exasperation. "Molly, you have to stop being so sensitive. You can't fall apart every time things don't. Go your way." Clara was just being honest. That became the narrative of my life. My passion was quaint. My sensitivity was a flaw. My emotions were a sign of instability. They built a cage for me out of these perceptions, and for a long time, I lived inside it. They missed my win at the county fair's youth baking competition because it was the same day as Clara's regional science fair. She placed third, a fact celebrated for weeks. My blue ribbon was taped to the refrigerator, where it was soon covered by a school lunch menu and forgotten. In college, after a painful breakup, I fell into a deep funk, struggling with anxiety that felt like a physical weight. I called my parents for support, and their response was to suggest I take a medical leave from my studies. "Maybe you're just not cut out for the pressure," my father had said, his voice laced not with concern, but with a weary kind of disappointment. They never let me forget it. Any time I showed strong emotion, passion, anger, profound sadness, it was thrown back at me. "Here we go again," my mother would sigh. "Don't have one of your episodes, Molly." They had diagnosed me as fragile, and they treated me as such, handling me with a careful distance, as if I might break and inconvenience them. After my grandmother Evelyn passed away, that fragility felt real. The light in my world had gone out. The scent of cinnamon and butter was replaced by the sterile, lemon scent of grief. I inherited her recipe book, a thick leather-bound volume with her elegant script filling every page. It was my only real connection to her, a tangible piece of her soul. I was working a dead-end job at a call center, my days a monotonous loop of placating angry customers, my creativity wilting under the fluorescent lights. One evening, sitting in my tiny apartment kitchen, I opened the book. The pages fell open to her recipe for lavender shortbread. On a whim, I baked a batch. As the floral, buttery aroma filled my small space, it felt like my grandmother was right there, her hand on my shoulder. It was the first time I had felt a spark of real joy since she died. An idea, fragile and new, began to form. What if I could make people feel this? What if I could build a place that felt like her kitchen? I broached the idea of opening a bakery at the next Sunday family dinner. I laid out my vision, a cozy spot, using only Grandma's original recipes, a haven of authentic, handcrafted goodness. My father cleared his throat, a sound he always made before delivering a gentle but firm rejection. "Molly, that's a lovely thought. A very sweet sentiment. But a business? It's a brutal world out there. 90% of restaurants fail in the first year." My mother nodded in agreement. "It's just so risky, darling. And you remember how you get under pressure. A business is constant pressure." They saw it as another one of my emotional whims, a flight of fancy. But Clara, who had just finished her MBA, paused. Her eyes, usually dismissive of my hobbies, held a flicker of something different. Calculation. "The artisanal market is growing, Dad," she said, her tone analytical. "There's a real demand for authenticity. If the branding is right, it could work." She wasn't seeing my dream. She was seeing a business model, a market niche. But it was a yes, or at least a maybe, and I clung to it. The problem, as my father was quick to point out, was capital. It takes a small fortune to start a business like that, Molly. And frankly, it's not an investment we're prepared to make. The unspoken words hung in the air. An investment in you. Path dejected, I went to my weekly tea with Eleonora Vance. Eleonora had been my grandmother's best friend since they were girls. They were an odd pair, my grandmother, warm and earthy. Eleonora, sharp, elegant, and with an air of sophisticated mischief. She was a retired history professor who wore tailored suits and striking silver jewelry. After Grandma died, Eleonora had made a point of staying in my life, a living link to the person I missed most. I told her about my bakery idea and my family's reaction. She listened intently, her piercing blue eyes never leaving my face. She didn't offer platitudes or sympathies. When I was finished, she simply set her teacup down with a decisive click. "Your grandmother always said your hands had magic in them, Molly," she said, her voice firm. "And she also said your parents wouldn't know a good investment if it bit them on their meticulously tailored backsides. So, let's do it ourselves." I stared at her, stunned. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she said, a slow smile spreading across her face, "that I have a considerable amount of money sitting in an account, being terribly bored. It's time it did something useful. Consider it your seed money. A grant from the Evelyn Foundation." Papa, I remember sitting in a lawyer's office a week later, the air smelling of old paper and leather. It was Eleonora's lawyer, a man named Mr. Davies, who was as precise and thorough as she was. Eleonora was clear. This was to be a partnership. I was the heart, the creative force. She would be the silent financial backer. As we went over the incorporation documents, Eleonora paused the lawyer. "Mr. Davies," she said, her tone casual but her eyes sharp, "I want to add a specific clause, just a small bit of insurance. What happens in a partnership if one partner wants to fundamentally change the core product, the very essence of the business, against the wishes of the other founding partner?" Mr. Davies raised an eyebrow. "You could stipulate a dissolution clause or a buyout mechanism." "No," Eleonora said firmly. "I want something more definitive. A clause that protects the integrity of the founding principle. In this case, the recipes of Evelyn Monroe." I remember her looking at me, a knowing, almost sad look in her eyes. "Let's call it the legacy clause. In the event of an irreconcilable dispute over the core recipes or a forced buyout attempt, ownership reverts to the partner who remains the steward of the original vision." I was young and naive, so full of hope for the bakery that such a conflict seemed impossible. It felt like an arcane piece of legal jargon. A what-if so remote it was laughable. I barely paid it any mind. Clara was brought in after the primary incorporation was complete. She was busy with the final exams for her MBA and was happy to let me handle the boring paperwork. I showed her the finalized documents in the half-light of her campus library. She glanced at the signature page, her eyes scanning for her name. "So it's a 50-50 split between us?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "And Eleonora is a silent partner. She provided the financing." Clara shrugged. "Grandma's old friend? Nice of her. So I just sign here." She scribbled her name without reading a single word of the preceding pages. The legacy clause, tucked away in the dense legal text, went completely unnoticed. To our parents, we told a simplified version. Eleonora, in a fit of sentimental generosity, had given me a small loan to get my little project off the ground. They were pleased that the financial risk wasn't theirs, and seemed content to let us play at being businesswomen. They had no idea that Eleonora wasn't a lender. She was the bedrock on which the entire enterprise was built. The first year was a blur of exhausting, exhilarating work. We found a small sunlit storefront on a quiet side street and named it the Gilded Spoon. I was there before dawn, my hands covered in dough, coaxing my grandmother's recipes to life in a commercial kitchen. The scent of butter and sugar became my life again. I was happy, truly happy, for the first time in years. Clara was a whirlwind of energy, a natural at the front of house. She designed the minimalist, chic interior, managed the staff with ruthless efficiency, and charmed every customer and local food blogger who walked through the door. We were a good team. The yin and yang of it worked. But slowly, hairline cracks began to appear in our foundation. The first real argument was over butter. My grandmother's recipes called for a specific high-fat European-style butter that cost nearly twice as much as the standard commercial brand. "Molly, no one can tell the difference," Clara insisted, holding up 2 cost analysis spreadsheets. "This is a 40% saving. It's a no-brainer from a business perspective. I can tell the difference, I said, my voice quiet but firm. And Grandma would have. The texture of the croissants will be off. The flavor won't be as rich. Clara threw her hands up in frustration. You and your grandmother, this isn't her home kitchen, it's a business. We have to think about margins, scalability. I refused to budge. On this, I was immovable. The recipes were sacrosanct. We used the expensive butter, but a new tension simmered between us. My parents, when they heard about the dispute, sided with Clara. Your sister has a business degree, Molly, my father said condescendingly. Perhaps you should defer to her judgment on these matters. She's thinking with her head, not just her heart. Popper. Despite our internal friction, the Gilded Spoon became a runaway success. We were the darlings of the local food scene. Magazine articles were written. We were praised for our uncompromising commitment to quality and authentic, old-world baking. The irony was painful. The very thing Clara wanted to dismantle was the foundation of our acclaim. And as our reputation grew, so did Clara's role as the public. Face of the company, she was articulate, polished, and media savvy. In interviews, she spoke of our vision and our brand philosophy. She was the elegant restaurateur. I was the unseen artisan in the back. A local morning news show did a segment on us. I watched it on my phone during a break, leaning against a flour-dusted sack of sugar. The camera loved Clara. She gave a tour of the front of the bakery, smiling warmly, talking about the importance of community and heritage. Then, for a fleeting moment, the camera panned to the open kitchen door. You could see me in the background, a blurry figure in an apron, pulling a tray of scones from the oven. The reporter didn't even mention my name. Later that day, my mother called, gushing. Clara was just wonderful, a complete natural. She looked so professional. We are so proud there was no mention of my blurred-out cameo. I told myself it didn't matter. Clara was better at that stuff. All that mattered was the work, the baking. But it did matter. It was a small cut. Another layer of invisibility being draped over me. Far. The bigger the bakery got, the more Clara chafed against the constraints of my grandmother's methods. Her MBA-driven mind saw inefficiency everywhere. She saw tradition as a bottleneck. The pressure intensified. She wanted to expand, to franchise, to create a Gilded Spoon empire. We can't scale with these methods, Molly, she'd argue, her voice sharp with impatience. Your grandmother's techniques are for a home baker, not a national brand. They're too time-consuming, too costly. This culminated in her bringing in a brand strategist, a slick consultant named Marcus, with a blindingly white smile and a briefcase full of charts. He set up a projector in our small office, and for an hour he presented a vision for the future of the Gilded Spoon that made my blood run cold. He spoke of optimizing production and leveraging brand equity. His plan involved replacing most of our from-scratch recipes with high-quality pre-made bases and frozen doughs. He presented a plan for a line of vegan and gluten-free products that bore no resemblance to anything my grandmother had ever made. The key, he said, pointing to a graph showing a hockey stick-like profit projection, is to maintain the perception of authenticity while streamlining the reality of production. Prefar. It was a proposal to gut the soul of my bakery and wear its skin as a costume. I felt a surge of cold fury. No, I said, the word dropping into the silence of the room like a stone. Everyone turned to look at me. Clara's face tightened. My parents, who had been invited to sit in, looked at me with open disappointment. No, Clara repeated, her voice dripping with condescension. That's it? Just no. This entire presentation is about turning the Gilded Spoon into the very thing we set out not to be, I said, my voice shaking slightly but gaining strength. It's about selling a lie. My grandmother's name is tied to this place. Her legacy is in the ingredients, in the methods. It's not just a brand, it's real. My father sighed that weary, familiar sigh. Molly, Marcus is an expert. These are just facts and figures. There's no need to get so emotional about it. Emotional, I shot back, my voice rising. This is my life's work. It's Grandma's life's work. Of course I'm emotional. My mother placed a calming hand on my father's arm. See, she said softly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. This is what we mean. She can't separate business from her feelings. It's her instability. The word landed like a punch. They were using my passion, the very engine of the bakery's success, as proof of my incompetence. I looked at Clara, hoping for a sliver of support, of sisterhood. But her eyes were cold, her face a mask of frustration. She sided with the PowerPoint presentation. The battle lines were drawn. Paragraph. A few weeks later, an email arrived that changed everything. We had been nominated for the Golden Whisk, the most prestigious national award for artisanal food crafters. It was the James Beard of the baking world. The nomination wasn't for the bakery as a whole, but for a single product, our lemon cloud cake, Grandma Evelyn's signature recipe, my creation, the one thing in the entire bakery that was unequivocally 100% mine. The nomination set off a firestorm of local and national press. For the first time, the questions weren't just about the brand. They were about the baker. Who was the artisan behind this perfect cake? 2 weeks after that, we won. The Gilded Spoon was officially home to the best cake in the country. My phone rang off the hook. My parents were ecstatic, suddenly bursting with pride. Our girls, my father kept booming to anyone who would listen. But behind the celebratory calls, a current of panic was building. A major national food magazine, Epicurean Digest, wanted to do a 6-page feature. Not on the bakery, on me. They wanted to spend a day with the creative genius behind the award-winning recipe. They wanted to photograph me in my element, to tell my story. Perhorse. This was my family's worst-case scenario. Their carefully constructed image of Clara as the polished, brilliant visionary was about to be shattered. The narrative couldn't be controlled if the unstable, unpolished, emotional sister was front and center. I started to feel the shift immediately. The celebratory mood in the family vanished, replaced by a tense, brittle silence. I would walk into a room and conversations would stop. I caught my parents and Clara in hushed, urgent conferences, their faces grim. The air grew thick with unspoken things. I felt a familiar, cold dread creeping up my spine, the feeling of being on the outside of a decision that was about to be made about me. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen, trying to focus on a new bread recipe, but my hands were shaking. I overheard Clara on the phone in the office, her voice low and sharp. "No, I understand," she was saying. "The priority is to protect the asset. We have to contain the potential damage." Protect the asset. Was that me or the bakery? And what was the damage I was about to cause? A wave of nausea washed over me. I packed up my things and left early, unable to bear the oppressive atmosphere. I called Eleonora. I told her about the award, the magazine feature, the sudden iciness from my family. I told her I was scared. Her voice on the other end of the line was a bastion of calm in my swirling panic. "Breathe, Molly," she said softly. "I had a feeling this day would come. Let them make their move. Whatever it is, you just listen. Do not argue. Do not defend yourself. And do not, under any circumstances, sign anything. Call me the moment they show their hand. I will be there when you need me." The summons came 2 days later. Clara called me, her voice artificially bright and businesslike. "Hey, Molly. Dad wants to have a quick board meeting tonight. Just to go over strategy for the magazine piece and the future. Can you be at the bakery at 7? A board meeting. We'd never had a formal board meeting in our lives. It was a euphemism, and I knew it. This was it. My stomach twisted into a tight, cold knot. I remembered Eleonora's words. Let them make their move. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, walking through a nearby park, the autumn leaves crunching under my feet. I thought about my grandmother, about her faith in me. I thought about the years of being told I was too much or not enough. By the time I walked towards the bakery that evening, the sun had set, and the streetlights cast long, lonely shadows. I wasn't just scared anymore. I was angry. A quiet, deep anger that felt like a pilot light finally catching flame. I pulled open the door to the Gilded Spoon, the little bell chiming mockingly, and walked into my own execution. The air inside the bakery was cold and sterile. The warm, buttery scent of the day had been replaced by the sharp smell of cleaning fluid and something else, something metallic and tense. My parents, Richard and Susan, were sitting at the largest table, their postures rigid. Clara was standing by the counter, arms crossed, avoiding my eyes. And next to my father sat a man I'd never seen before. He was in his 50s, with a severe haircut, a dark gray suit, and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He held a sleek leather briefcase on his lap. No one said hello. "Molly, thank you for coming," my father began, his voice taking on a formal chairman of the board tone that was utterly alien in this space. "This is Mr. Abernathy. He's our family's legal counsel." My blood ran cold. Our family's lawyer? Not the bakery's lawyer. Theirs. I sat down opposite them, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a movie about someone else's life. Eleonora's voice echoed in my head. "Just listen." Parafras, or my father cleared his throat. "Molly, we are at a pivotal moment for this business. The Golden Whisk Award is a tremendous opportunity, one that could set this family up for generations. It requires careful, strategic, and stable leadership to navigate the path ahead." He paused, looking to my mother for support. Susan leaned forward, her face a mask of practiced concern. "Darling," she said, her voice soft and cloying, "we are all so incredibly proud of your talent, but we've been worried about you for a long time. The pressure of this new level of success, it's immense. We've seen how you struggle with pressure." She didn't need to specify. The ghosts of every past accusation filled the room. The birthday cake, the teenage baking competition where I'd cried after coming in second, my bout of anxiety in college. They were all being brought forth as evidence against me. Then Clara spoke, her voice cutting through the cloying sympathy like a shard of glass. "The fact is, Molly, your resistance to innovation has been holding us back for over a year. You're emotionally attached to the past. It's a liability. With Epicurean Digest coming, we need a single, strong, polished voice for the brand. A face that projects confidence and stability." She didn't say the rest, but she didn't have to. "And that face isn't yours." The consultant, Marcus, had apparently done his job well. They had fully embraced his soulless philosophy. Parafar. The most surreal part was how they twisted my passion into a pathology. They spoke of my dedication to my grandmother's craft not as a virtue, but as a symptom of my instability. They framed my insistence on quality as an emotional, irrational quirk. Mr. Abernathy listened to it all with a blank, impassive expression. They were building a case, brick by painful brick, for my incompetence. "I was in the kitchen last week when you burned that batch of brioche," Clara added, her voice sharp with feigned concern. "You were shaking. You had to sit down. You can't handle the day-to-day pressure now, Molly. How are you going to handle a national media spotlight? You'll crack. You'll embarrass the company. You'll embarrass this family." The memory stung. I had been shaking, not from pressure, but from the quiet fury of overhearing her protect the asset phone call just an hour earlier. They were twisting my reaction to their own cruelty and using it as a weapon against me. It was the most masterful and most brutal act of gaslighting I had ever experienced. Double S. Mr. Abernathy finally spoke, his voice a dry rustle. "Given these circumstances, and with the long-term health of the business as the primary concern, the family has decided to restructure the ownership." He opened his briefcase and slid a sheaf of papers across the polished wood table. The document stopped directly in front of me. "This is a buyout agreement," he stated, his tone devoid of any emotion. "It's a very generous offer. It will purchase your 50% share in the company, leaving you with a considerable nest egg and no more of the pressure you so clearly find difficult to manage. It frees you up to pursue your hobbies without the stress of running a national brand." I stared at the paper. My name was on it. A number was on it. A sum that was insultingly low, a fraction of what my half of the now famous bakery was worth. It wasn't an offer. It was a dismissal. A severance package for my own life. "It's for the best, Molly," my father said, his voice softening now that the dirty work was done. "Clara will take over full ownership. The brand will be secure. The family will be secure. We just need you to sign." My hand trembled as I reached for the pen they had so thoughtfully placed beside the document. I could feel all four of them watching me, a collective predatory stillness. For a terrifying second, I almost did it. The weight of their combined will, a force that had been pressing down on me my entire life, was immense. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was just a fragile, emotional girl who had gotten in over her head. The thought was a siren song of surrender, promising a quiet, painless end to the fight. Barfer. And then, the little brass bell above the front door chimed. Its bright, clear sound cut through the suffocating tension in the room like a crack of lightning. Every head snapped towards the door. Framed in the doorway, silhouetted against the dark street outside, was Eleonora Vance. She was wearing a chic, cream-colored trench coat, and she looked utterly, magnificently composed. She surveyed the scene, the lawyer, the documents, my pale face, and a look of profound, icy disappointment crossed her features. "Eleonora," my mother said, flustered and annoyed by the interruption. "This isn't a good time. We're in the middle of a private family meeting." Eleonora closed the door softly behind her and walked towards the table, her heels clicking purposefully on the tile floor. "It stopped being a family meeting when you brought a lawyer, Susan," she said, her voice dangerously calm. She placed her own elegant, worn leather briefcase on the table with a soft thud. "And it stopped being a private matter the moment you decided to discuss the disposition of my investment." My father scoffed. "Your investment? Eleonora, you gave Molly a small loan years ago. We're very grateful, of course, but that hardly gives you a seat at this table." A thin, dangerous smile touched Eleonora's lips. "Richard, your ignorance of your own business affairs is, as always, breathtaking." She opened her briefcase. She didn't pull out a stack of papers. She pulled out a single leather-bound folder, the original incorporation binder, the one Clara had never bothered to read. It looked ancient and powerful, like a book of spells. The air crackled with a new kind of tension. Mr. Abernathy, the lawyer, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He recognized the look of a person who had come prepared. Eleonora opened the binder, her movements deliberate and precise. She flipped through a few pages, then stopped, running a manicured finger down a block of text. "You're all quite proud of your business acumen, aren't you?" she said, her eyes sweeping over my parents and Clara. "Always talking about margins and branding and scalability. It's a shame none of you ever bothered to read the foundational document of your own company." She cleared her throat and then began to read, her voice ringing out in the silent bakery with the clarity of a judge delivering a verdict. Clause 11b. The Legacy Clause. In the event of an irreconcilable internal dispute regarding the founding principles of the company, a deviation from the foundational recipes of Evelyn Monroe, or an attempted forced buyout of a founding partner, full ownership of all shares, assets, and intellectual property of the Gilded Spoon LLC shall revert entirely and immediately to the founding partner who remains the primary steward of said original recipes and vision. She paused, letting the words hang in the air like a death sentence. She slowly lifted her eyes from the page and looked directly at me. A small, triumphant smile played on her lips. "That, my dears," she said, her gaze sweeping back to my stunned family, "would be Molly." The silence that followed was absolute. a vacuum where all the air, all the smug certainty, had been sucked out of the room. It lasted for 3 long, beautiful seconds before it shattered. "What?" Clara shrieked, her voice a raw, ugly sound. "That's not possible. That's not real. It's a trick." My father, his face a mottled purplish red, snatched the binder from Eleonora. His eyes, along with my mother's, scanned the page frantically. Mr. Abernathy, the lawyer, simply leaned over, read the clause, and then sank back into his chair. A flicker of what looked like professional pity in his eyes. He knew. "The signatures are all here," he said quietly, his voice a death knell to their ambitions. "Clara, Richard, Susan. You all signed the shareholder agreement addendum that ratified these bylaws 5 years ago." Clara looked as if she'd been slapped. "I never read it. Molly just told me where to sign." "A lesson in due diligence, perhaps," Eleonora said, her voice dripping with ice. The lawyer began packing his briefcase with slow, deliberate movements. He looked at my father. "My counsel here is concluded. My professional advice to you is to retain separate counsel, immediately." And with that, he stood up, gave a curt nod, and walked out of the bakery, leaving my family alone in the wreckage they had created. But what followed was not a rational discussion. It was an implosion. Clara rounded on me, her face contorted with a rage so pure it was terrifying. "You did this," she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You planned this, all along. You snake. You set me up." My father, sputtering, turned his fury on Eleonora. "How dare you interfere in our family? This is a family business." "It ceased to be a family business when you tried to cannibalize one of your own for profit," Eleonora retorted, unmoved. "And you should know, Richard, that as the majority investor who was never once consulted on this restructuring, I could have sued you into the next century. This clause is actually the cleaner, kinder option." My mother, ever the manipulator, tried a different tactic. She turned to me, her eyes welling with tears. "Molly, how could you do this to your sister? To us? After everything we've done for you? We were just trying to protect you." The audacity of it, the sheer, unmitigated gall of that statement, was what finally broke my silence. I stood up, and for the first time in my life, I felt taller than all of them. The fear was gone, burned away by the cold fury and the sudden, shocking surge of vindication. "Protect me?" I said, my voice quiet, steady, and devoid of the emotion they so despised. "You weren't protecting me. You were caging me. You have spent my entire life telling me I am weak and unstable so that you could feel strong and in control. You didn't build this bakery. I did. My hands, my heart, and my grandmother's soul built this place." I looked at each of them in turn. My tearful mother, my apoplectic father, my shattered sister. "You did this to yourselves." I walked to the front door and held it open. "Get out," I said. "Get out of my bakery." For a moment, they just stared, shocked into inaction by this new, firm version of me. Then, defeated, they shuffled out. A tableau of broken rage and disbelief. Clara shot me one last look of pure hatred before she disappeared into the night. I closed the door and flipped the lock. The click echoed in the sudden vast silence. The bakery was mine. The silence was deafening. It was filled with the ghosts of the ugly words that had been said. But it was also filled with a new, clean sense of space. I leaned back against the door and slid to the floor, my legs no longer able to hold me. The tears came then, a hot, shuddering torrent. But it was different from all the other times I had cried. It wasn't the weeping of a victim. It was the messy, cathartic, overwhelming release of a prisoner who had just been set free. Eleonora came and sat on the floor beside me, not saying a word, simply placing her cool, dry hand over mine. We sat like that for a long time as the hum of the refrigerators kept time with my ragged breaths. "Your grandmother knew," Eleonora said finally, her voice soft. "She always knew you had the talent, and she knew, even back then, that they had the greed. She told me once, Eleonora, my Molly has a spine of pure steel. They just haven't pushed her hard enough to make her find it yet. That clause, that was her, Molly. That was her way of protecting you all these years later. It was her final recipe. Power. The days that followed were a strange mix of logistical nightmares and profound peace. The first thing I did was hire a locksmith. The sound of the new lock clicking into place was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. Through a new lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman recommended by Eleonora, I sent a formal notice of the ownership transfer to my family's new legal counsel. It was cold, it was legal, and it was final. The next decision was harder. The Gilded Spoon felt tainted, its name poisoned by my family's ambition. But it also had brand recognition. I decided on a compromise. I officially renamed the parent company Evelyn and Eleonora's, in honor of the two women who had built and saved it. I kept the Gilded Spoon as the name for our product lines. It was a small change, but it felt monumental. It was a declaration that the soul of the company had been reclaimed. I also got a call from Sarah, my best baker, who had quit a week before the ambush. She'd been disgusted by Clara's streamlining plans. "I heard what happened," she said, her voice warm with respect. "Is it true?" "It's true," I told her. "Good," she replied. "We all knew you were the heart of this place, Molly. We were just waiting for you to know it too. I'd like my job back if you'll have me." Pahar. As expected, once the legal dust settled and the reality of their situation sank in, my family began what I privately called the apology tour. Their names were mud in our small community, the story having leaked out through hushed gossip and the very public departure of their lawyer. They had been living comfortably off the bakery's success, and that tap had been turned off. Hard. The first attempt was a phone call from my mother. Her voice was thick with fake tears as she spoke of misunderstandings and how they just wanted what was best. It was the same old script, and for the first time, I heard it not as an excuse, but as the hollow manipulation it was. I agreed to meet them, all three of them, one last time. We met at a neutral cafe, a place with no history for us. They looked smaller, diminished. They offered clumsy, self-serving apologies that danced around the truth. "We let the business side of things get ahead of us," my father mumbled, staring into his coffee. Clara, looking haggard, said, "I was under a lot of pressure. I didn't handle it well. Not once did they say, 'We were wrong. We betrayed you. We were greedy.'" I listened calmly, letting them exhaust their excuses. When they were done, I took a deep breath. "I hear you," I said, my voice even. "And for my own peace of mind, I forgive you, but I don't trust you. And I will not forget what you tried to do. You are not welcome in my business, and for now, you are not welcome in my life. I need to heal, and I can't do that with you in it." I stood up, left $20 on the table for my coffee, and walked out without looking back, leaving them sitting in a stunned, silent tableau. The cage was gone, and I had no intention of ever walking back into it.